The first to invite Anoop. So you had vast experiences in the global arena, including at the IMF. And well, this is Capitalism 4.0, but IMF used to be known as Capitalist 3.0 institution. They are sort of a key pillar of the Washington consensus rather than emphasizing on inclusive growth. But they're also changing, and they are putting more emphasis on inclusive growth. They are focusing on structural reform issues. So what is your view about these new approaches which is taking place in the OECD?
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Dongwon and Douglas. It's a great privilege to be here. Let me just start by saying that I would like to congratulate OECD for its focus on these mega trends. I think the world is changing. Globalization is entering a new era. Countries are rebalancing for various reasons. We're moving connectedness to a new stage. The world is moving away from trading in goods to services, and more recently into digital data flows and technology. I think we're at a very critical stage. It's a historic stage as the extent of connectedness in the world is changing. Now, my second point is that when such change takes place, it's very important that policies keep up, incentives keep up, institutions keep up. And although it's a big jump for me to make, but you know that this week the Nobel Prize in Economics went to two economists who are emphasizing contract theory. And I interpret contract more broadly. You have contracts and incentives at the firm level. You have contracts and incentives at the economy level. And my sense is that with the changes taking place in globalization, the incentives at the broader macro level haven't yet changed as they need to. And why do I say that? This is my third point. Let's look at where the world is. Look at growth and productivity. We know that productivity, not only has it fallen in advanced countries and emerging markets, every year for the last 4 years, the projections institutions have made, including the IMF, of growth and productivity have been higher than the outcomes. It's taken us a long time to understand why we are where we are. And my sense is we are where we are for one reason. Because institutions and incentives haven't adjusted to changing globalization, there's been a misallocation of resources globally. That is why productivity has been falling. There's a misallocation of resources. Now, you may ask, what do I mean by misallocation of resources? I'll give you one simple example. The last 4 or 5 years, many countries, most emerging markets, certainly China we all know, they have not been short of cheap capital. Capital has flown into emerging markets generally over the last 5 years for a variety of reasons. The result, however, is high debt, which needs to be addressed, and a misallocation of investment. That is why productivity has fallen, because the efficiency of use has deteriorated, and the kind of investment that is needed has not been in areas consistent with changing globalization. There is a skills. Skills are changing as we're moving from goods to data flow technology, unless there is investment, for example, in education, those who lose jobs because trade is moving away from manufactured goods to services, to data, unless you have the education systems to rebuild your capacity, there will be inequity and unemployment. So my sense is because institutions and incentives haven't fully kept up with changing globalization, there's been a misallocation of resources. That is why productivity has fallen. I am not seeing where growth and productivity is. I'm not seeing it as a secular, long-term development. I'm seeing it as a result of policies which have not been consistent with changing megatrends. And as we look ahead, if what we see in digital globalization and technology is true, if it really is what it seems to be, and I congratulate OECD for producing reports on this, but if it is what we think it is, it opens up tremendous opportunities. It means that small and medium enterprises in countries far from financial hubs, if they have access to data flows, suddenly these small and medium enterprises could have a scale factor of reach that they would never have had otherwise. But in order to get there, policies, institutions, and education have to change. If they don't, and this technology revolution is real, we will have rising inequalities. So there is a clear challenge for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Anoop. You raised very interesting aspects of globalization. Traditionally, when we are talking about the globalization, we are saying about transaction of goods and services, and you extended it further to the area of data and information globalization, and you mentioned about the misallocation of resources. But my quick responses to your intervention is that while you touches upon certain areas of impact on productivity, output, and the utilization of those information technology in the small and medium-sized enterprises, what would be the distributional impact of globalization, not only digital economies, but also digital globalization, but also trade and services and capital? And could you respond in less than 1 minute? I'm sorry to have this question, but.
Very quick answer. We know that in most countries, the labor force is concentrated in small and medium enterprises. In most countries, this explains half to 2/3 of the labor force. If you give these SMEs the finance they need and the access to technology, they will boom, and this will help equity. If you do not, the concerns of inequality are going to worsen. So that is the point I wanted to make.
Well, you had worked on Korea as a director of Asia and Pacific Department at the IMF. You know so much things about the Korean economy. So what do you think the Korean economy needs to do to transform itself from the input-driven to productivity-based growth and the escape from the current stagnation of growth?
Okay, thank you. Let me make just one point. When I was in the IMF, we did a study looking at the extent to which the services sector is protected in Korea, but not only Korea, Japan too, and China too. And also employment protection in Korea is very high. What this means is it's very difficult for resources to move sector to sector. The study we did in the IMF showed that if in the next 10 years, the regulatory burden or the controls on trade and investment in services in Korea were to reach the top levels of the OECD countries. Right now, you're quite low. If you were to reach the top levels of protection in employment and in terms of services, it will have a significant effect on Korea's productivity and growth. And in that regard, if I may say, the government here, I think last year, proposed a tripartite agreement on labor and employment protection. They've also produced, I think, a three-pronged strategy for services. I think, in my personal view, these go directly in the direction of what needs to be done for Korea just to reach the standards of the top countries in the OECD for protection of services and employment. And if you do that, you will see a significant improvement in productivity and growth over the next 10 years.
Thank you, Anoop. Well, I can agree with you more than enough. Well, at the OECD Council, a prime minister from certain country I can remember, but when he was asked what is important for successful structural reform, he answered that there are three important elements, success factors. Number one, implementation. Number two, implementation. And number three, implementation. So what the policy recommendation you made today, we all know, but there are some problems in the implementation, and I hope that our society can get together to solve such an implementation issue. Yeah, please.
One point. Korea is highly connected globally on goods, especially manufactured goods. You're highly connected. You're in the top 5 or top 8 of countries in your openness and your connectedness. If you can do the same for services and SMEs, it'll have a significant effect on growth. It's simply extending to services what you're already doing in goods.
The World Knowledge Forum